the Universal Terror Registry lists human war crimes as examples of intelligent cruelty. Part 1 had been processing membership applications for the Galactic Council for 73 years. In all that time, she had never seen the Universal Terror Registry flag an application before. Not once. The UTR was an educational database, not a security system. It existed to teach young species about war crimes and cruelty so they would never repeat the mistakes of the past. It didn't interact with membership applications at all. Until now. She stared at the holographic display floating above her desk. The human application blinked red with 17 different warning codes, touched the screen with one of her 6 fingers, pulling up the detailed report. Her secondary hearts began beating faster as she read. The humans called their planet Earth. They had submitted all required documentation. Their technology level qualified them for membership. Their society had been unified under a single planetary government for 200 years. They had eliminated poverty and war. They had cleaned their oceans and restored their forests. By every standard measurement, they were model candidates. But the UTR had found something else in their historical records. Opened the registry cross-reference file. Her skin changed from its normal blue to a sickly gray as she read. Human conflicts appeared in 47 separate categories of war crimes. In 12 of those categories, human actions were listed as the primary example, the defining example, the template against which all other cruelty was measured. She had to understand this, had studied warfare across hundreds of species. War was usually simple. Species fought over territory, over resources, over breeding rights. They fought until one side won or until both sides grew tired. War was brutal, yes, but it was honest, direct, understandable. What humans had done was something else entirely. She pulled up the first example. Category: psychological warfare. The entry showed human soldiers dropping papers from flying machines during something they called the Second World War. The papers showed pictures and words designed to make enemy soldiers feel hopeless. They told enemy soldiers their families were in danger. They told them their leaders had abandoned them. They told them exactly how many of their friends had died. Felt her skin grow colder. Most species fought bodies, humans fought minds. She opened another file. Category: economic warfare. The entry described something humans called scorched earth tactics. When retreating, human armies would burn their own crops. They would poison their own wells. They would destroy their own cities, not to hurt the enemy's soldiers, but to make sure the enemy could not use the resources. The goal was not to kill the enemy army. The goal was to make victory so expensive that the enemy would give up. The next file made her stand up from her chair. Category: strategic resource denial. Humans had fought wars where the entire purpose was to prevent the enemy from accessing specific materials. They would bomb factories that made civilian goods because those factories could theoretically make military goods. They would sink ships carrying food because that food might feed soldiers. They calculated exactly how much suffering they needed to inflict on civilian populations to make military operations impossible. Had to sit down again. Her legs felt weak. She spent the next 6 hours reading. The more she read, the less she understood. Humans had created weapons they called nuclear bombs that could destroy entire cities in seconds, but they had not used these weapons to win wars. They had built them to threaten other humans with total destruction. The concept was called mutually assured destruction. Both sides built weapons that could end civilization itself, knowing they would never use them. Hopping the fear alone would prevent war. It was the most elaborate game of psychological manipulation had ever encountered. She found records of something humans called siege warfare. When humans surrounded enemy cities, they did not simply wait for surrender. They calculated the exact number of calories the trapped population needed to survive. They allowed just enough food through their blockade to keep people alive but too hungry to fight. They waited for specific psychological breaking points. They studied how long it took before parents would surrender to save their children. They turned starvation into a precise military instrument. The concept of total war appeared in multiple entries. Read the definition 3 times before she understood it. Total war meant every aspect of society became a target. Factories, farms, roads, bridges, radio stations, newspapers. The goal was not to defeat the enemy army. The goal was to destroy the enemy's ability to have an army at all. It was warfare that attacked the entire concept of organized society. But what disturbed most was not the violence itself. It was the intelligence behind it. Humans had not simply killed each other in rage or fear. They had studied warfare like it was science. They had universities that taught military strategy. They had written thousands of books analyzing battles. They had developed entire philosophies about the nature of conflict. They had made cruelty into an art form. Found a file labeled Geneva Conventions. She opened it and discovered that humans had created rules for warfare. They had sat down after particularly terrible wars and agreed on limits. No poisoning water supplies. No attacking medical personnel. No torture of prisoners. The list went on for pages. At first, this seemed like evidence of human morality. Then understood the darker truth. Humans had needed to create these rules because they kept discovering new ways to hurt each other. The rules existed because humans were so creative in their cruelty that they frightened themselves. She pulled up the human application again and looked at the names of their ambassadors. James, ordinary names for representatives of an extraordinary species. How did you talk to people whose ancestors had been so systematically terrible to each other? Composed a message to the council. She explained what she had found. She noted that humanity had been at peace for 2 centuries. She acknowledged that their society appeared stable and ethical, but she recommended extreme caution. The humans were not violent in the way most species were violent. They were something worse. They were intelligent about their violence. The council responded within hours. They were as disturbed as, but they were also curious. They wanted to understand. They authorized to contact the human ambassadors and request a formal explanation. Drafted the message carefully. She tried to be diplomatic. She explained that the council needed to understand humanity's historical relationship with warfare before they could approve membership. She specifically asked the humans to explain why the UTR algorithms classified their warfare as intelligently cruel rather than simply brutal. The human response arrived the next morning. It was brief. Ambassador wrote that she and Doctor would be happy to appear before the council. She said they had expected these questions. She said they understood the council's concerns. And then she wrote something that made skin turn completely white. We are disturbed by our history too. That is exactly why we stopped. Read that sentence 5 times. She realized that humans were not proud of what they had done. They were ashamed. But they were honest about it. They were not trying to hide their past or excuse it. They were willing to look directly at their own cruelty and acknowledge it. She was not sure if that made them more trustworthy or more dangerous. The council scheduled the meeting for 1 week later. Spent that week preparing questions. She also spent it having nightmares. In her dreams, she saw humans studying her species the way they had studied themselves. She saw them calculating exactly how to break her people's will. She saw them turning their terrible intelligence toward new targets. She woke up each morning grateful that humans were on the other side of the galaxy, and that they claimed to have changed. But she also wondered what it took to change a species that had been so creative in its cruelty. And she wondered what would happen if they ever decided to be creative again. Part 2. Ambassador walked into the council chamber with her hands clasped behind her back. She moved with the careful confidence of someone who knew she was being evaluated with every step. Dr. James followed her, carrying a small data device. They both wore simple gray suits that seemed almost military in their precision. Watched them from her seat on the council floor. The 2 humans did not look dangerous, was small with dark hair going gray at the temples. James was tall with warm brown skin and glasses that made him look scholarly. They could have been teachers or scientists or administrators. They did not look like descendants of the creatures described in the Terra Registry, but knew better than to judge by appearance. The council chamber was circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Representatives from 43 species watched the humans with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Some had read the full Terra Registry report. Others had only seen the summary. All of them knew this was an unusual situation. Stepped onto the central platform. She looked up at the assembled council and smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone about to discuss something unpleasant but necessary. "Thank you for seeing us," said. Her voice was clear and carried well in the large chamber. "We know why we are here. We have read the Universal Terra Registry entries. We do not dispute them. Everything in those files happened. We are not here to deny our history or make excuses for it." She paused and looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. "We are here to help you understand why it happened and why it stopped." Felt her skin ripple. The human was being direct. That was good, maybe. James stepped forward and activated his data device. A holographic display appeared above the platform showing Earth from space. It was a beautiful planet, blue and green and white. It looked peaceful. "Most species fight wars over territory or resources," James said. His voice was deeper than but just as clear. "Your files show this pattern repeated across hundreds of civilizations. Two groups want the same thing. They fight until one group wins or both groups compromise. The war has a rational goal and a rational conclusion." The image changed to show human cities and armies. Humans fought those kinds of wars too, but we also fought wars about ideas, about how societies should be organized, about which gods were real, about pride and honor and revenge. We fought wars where the goal was not to take something from the enemy but to destroy the enemy's entire way of life. Saw several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This made our wars existential," James continued. "When you fight over territory, you can surrender the territory and survive. When you fight over ideas, surrendering means admitting your entire civilization was wrong. It means accepting that your ancestors were foolish. It means destroying your identity." Took over. So we made our wars total. If the enemy would not surrender, we would make them unable to continue fighting. We studied them. We learned what they needed to survive, and then we them those things. The holographic display showed images from human history: burning fields, destroyed bridges, sunken ships, bombed factories. Had seen these images before in the Terra Registry, but now she was seeing them with context. "The siege tactics you found in the registry," said, her voice harder now. "Those came from wars where both sides believed surrender meant cultural death, so defenders would accept starvation rather than give up. And attackers learned to use that starvation as a weapon. It was horrible, but from each side's perspective it was necessary." A council member from the species stood up. She was tall and covered in soft purple fur. "But you did not stop with necessity," she said, her voice carrying an edge of accusation. "You created theories about breaking morale. You studied psychology to maximize suffering. That goes beyond defense. That is cruelty as strategy." Nodded slowly. "You are right. We went further than necessary. We always did. And do you know why?" She did not wait for an answer. "Because we were afraid." Every human nation looked at every other human nation and saw a potential threat. We knew what we were capable of because we had seen what others had done. So we tried to make ourselves so terrifying that no one would dare attack us. We weaponized fear itself. James pulled up a new image. It showed two mushroom-shaped clouds rising over cities. Recognized them from the Terra Registry. Nuclear weapons. "Mutually assured destruction," James said quietly. "We built weapons that could end civilization, not to use them, to threaten to use them. We created a situation where any major war would kill everyone, so no one could afford to start a major war. That is insane, someone said from the upper tiers. Yes, agreed immediately. It was insane, but it worked. For almost a century, the major human powers did not fight each other directly because they were too afraid of nuclear war. We had made war so terrible that even we did not want to fight it anymore. Stood up, her skin had settled into a gray-blue color that indicated deep thought. Ambassador, I have read your history. This nuclear peace did not end all human warfare. You continued fighting smaller wars for decades after developing these weapons. Correct, said. We were hypocrites. We threatened total destruction to prevent big wars while still fighting small ones. We told ourselves these smaller conflicts did not count. We were very good at lying to ourselves. So what changed? Asked. Your application shows 200 years of peace. What made you stop? Looked at James. He nodded and pulled up a new image. It showed people holding small electronic devices, all connected by glowing lines that spanned the entire planet. We created a global information network, James said. Suddenly every human could see what every other human was doing. We could not hide our wars anymore. When soldiers committed atrocities, the world knew within hours. When governments lied, the evidence appeared online within days. We had to look at ourselves. And we were disgusted, finished. We saw our own cruelty reflected back at us from a million screens. We saw what we were doing to each other, and we could not justify it anymore. We could not pretend we were righteous when everyone could see we were just brutal. She paused and her voice grew softer. The worst thing about humans is that we are very good at lying to ourselves. The best thing about humans is that we eventually run out of lies. The information age made it impossible to sustain our self-deceptions. We had to face what we really were. And what are you? Asked quietly. We are a species that learned about cruelty by practicing it on ourselves, said. We are experts in suffering because we have inflicted it and endured it in every possible way. We know exactly how to break a population's will because we have done it to our own populations. We understand terror because we have been terrified. The council chamber was completely silent. We know this makes us disturbing, James said. We know you are looking at us and wondering if we can be trusted. That is why we submitted our entire history without censorship. We wanted you to see who we were, who we are trying to become. A chime sounded, indicating someone had requested to speak. Looked up and saw OK of the Harmonious Collective standing. OK was ancient, with gray skin covered in ritual scars. His species had been part of the council for over 1,000 years. I have a question, OK said, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. If you were so creative in your cruelty, so intelligent in your violence, what makes you believe you have truly changed? Peace is easy when there is no reason for war. What happens when you face a real threat again? And James looked at each other, saw something pass between them, not words but understanding. We do not know, admitted. We hope we would respond with the wisdom we have gained, but we are honest enough to admit we cannot be certain. Humans are capable of terrible things when we are afraid. Then perhaps, OK said slowly, you should remain isolated until you are certain. Before could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the council chamber. Felt her skin flash white with alarm. That sound meant only one thing, an emergency requiring immediate council attention. A communication screen appeared in the center of the chamber. The face of Admiral filled the display. He looked frightened. Council, we have detected an unknown fleet entering our space from the galactic rim. They are not responding to communication. They have already consumed 3 frontier colonies. Everything. Buildings, vegetation, water. They strip planets bare and move on. We estimate 47 more systems are in their path. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted questions. Some demanded military action, others called for evacuation. Looked at the two humans. They had not moved. They were watching the chaos with calm, analytical expressions, like they were studying a problem, like they were planning how to solve it. Part 3. The council chamber descended into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other. Some demanded the fleet be destroyed. Others insisted on attempting more communication. A few called for immediate evacuation of threatened systems. Watched it all with growing dread. The council was not designed for this kind of crisis. She looked back at the human ambassadors, and James stood quietly on the central platform, ignored in the confusion. They were talking to each other in low voices. James was making notes on his data device, was watching the tactical display with intense focus. They looked like soldiers preparing for battle. Admiral appeared on the screen again. His scales had turned pale yellow with stress. Council, we need direction. The fleet has entered the system. We have 18 hours before they reach the inhabited planet. 6 million civilians need evacuation. Send all available transport ships, someone shouted. That will take 48 hours minimum, the admiral replied. We do not have that much time. Then negotiate with them, another voice called out. They do not respond to any communication. We have tried every known language and transmission method. They simply consume and move forward. OK stood up, using his authority to quiet the chamber. We need a military response, but our doctrine is defensive. We have no experience with an enemy that does not negotiate. We do not know how to fight this. Yes, you do. Everyone turned, had spoken, her voice cutting through the noise. She stood at the center of the platform, her hands no longer clasped behind her back. She looked different now, more dangerous. Excuse me, OK said. You know how to fight this, repeated. You just do not want to admit it. You know exactly who has experience with enemies that do not negotiate. You know who has studied how to fight when normal rules do not apply. The chamber fell silent, felt her skin turn gray-blue as she understood what was suggesting. You want us to employ human tactics, OK said slowly. You want us to use the methods described in the Terra Registry. I want you to survive, said flatly. This enemy does not care about your ethics. They do not care about your rules. They will not stop because you are peaceful. They will consume your colonies and move on to the next ones. James stepped forward and activated his device. The holographic display changed to show tactical information about the approaching fleet. Based on the Admiral's data, these creatures follow predictable patterns. They move to systems with high biological content. They consume everything organic. They need approximately 72 hours per planet to complete their feeding cycle. Then they move to the next closest system with similar characteristics. How do you know this? Asked. Because I spent the last 20 minutes analyzing their behavior, James said. It is what humans do. We look at an enemy and we find their patterns. We predict what they will do next, and then we exploit those predictions. Address the council directly. You have a choice. You can try to evacuate everyone in the fleet's path. You will fail. Your logistics cannot move that many people that fast, or you can let us help you stop them. At what cost? Heard herself ask. What would you do that we cannot? His expression did not change. Everything you are afraid to do. We would make war the way humans make war, intelligently, completely, with no hesitation and no mercy. That is what we fear, OK said quietly. I know, replied, but fear us later, right now fear them more. The council debated for 3 hours. Representatives argued about ethics and precedent. Some refused to consider human involvement. Others reluctantly admitted they had no better options. The whole time, the fleet moved closer to the system. Finally, OK called for a vote. It passed by a slim margin. Humanity would be granted temporary military authority. They would coordinate the defense against the consuming fleet. Did not smile. She simply nodded and turned to James. "Contact Earth. We need Admiral and the contingency fleet. Tell them to bring everything." "Everything?" James asked. "Everything." 6 hours later, human ships began arriving through quantum jump points. They were not like Council ships. Council vessels were elegant and efficient, designed for exploration and defense. Human ships were blunt and aggressive, built with redundant systems and heavy armor. They looked like what they were: weapons. Admiral Sarah materialized on the Council chamber platform via hologram. She was an older woman with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She saluted formally, then turned to address the Council. "I have reviewed the situation," said. "The enemy fleet is predictable. They follow biological signatures. They move in straight lines between targets. They do not adapt their patterns. This is good news." "How is that good news?" someone asked. "Because predictable enemies can be manipulated," said. She activated a tactical display showing multiple star systems. "We are not going to fight them, not directly. We are going to lead them." James explained the strategy. Humans would deploy biological lures in uninhabited systems. The lures would emit the same signatures as populated planets but contain no actual life. The fleet would detect them and change course. Meanwhile, humans would evacuate real populations behind the fleet's new path. "You are going to trick them," said Understanding. "We are going to use their nature against them," James corrected. "They consume biological matter. We will give them biological matter, just not where they expect to find it." But the strategy required sacrifices. 3 frontier colonies with partial populations would have to be abandoned. There was not enough time to evacuate everyone. Those planets would be stripped clean while humans moved the fleet away from more populated systems. The Council struggled with this decision. To abandon citizens was unthinkable, but was ruthless in her calculation. 3 partially populated colonies or 47 fully populated systems. The mathematics is simple. You do not have to like it, you just have to accept it. OK made the call. The evacuations began. Over the next 2 weeks, human efficiency became clear. They moved populations with military precision. They deployed the biological lures exactly where needed. They calculated the fleet's every movement and stayed one step ahead, but saw the cost in human faces. Looked older every day. James stopped making eye contact with Council members. Admiral's reports grew briefer and more technical, as if she could not afford emotion. The strategy worked. The consuming fleet followed the lures away from populated space. They stripped 3 small colonies, just as predicted, then moved into empty systems where humans had prepared more lures. Each lure bought more time for evacuations. Each empty system moved the fleet further from the Council's core worlds. But humans did not stop at manipulation. They studied the fleet constantly, looking for weaknesses. James discovered that the creatures became sluggish after consuming certain chemical compounds. Admiral began seeding the biological lures with these compounds. The fleet slowed. Then humans found a way to hurt them. The consuming creatures needed to feed constantly. If they could not feed, they would enter hibernation and drift in space. Humans began destroying the biological content of planets just before the fleet arrived. Scorched Earth tactics, realized with horror. The same technique listed in the Terra Registry. "You are making them starve," she said too. "Yes," replied without apology. "We are turning their strength into weakness. They need to consume. We are making sure there is nothing to consume. They will follow our lures into empty space, grow too weak to continue, and eventually hibernate. Then we can study them safely. And if they adapt?" "They will not. We have observed their behavior for 2 weeks. They never change patterns. They are not intelligent like us. They are just efficient. That makes them predictable. Predictability means we can beat them." The final phase lasted another week. Human ships led the fleet on a carefully calculated path through empty systems. each one poisoned with chemicals that slowed the creatures further. The council watched with mixed fascination and horror. The humans were not cruel. They were worse than cruel. They were methodical. When the fleet finally stopped moving, drifting into hibernation in deep space, the council felt relief mixed with unease. They had been saved, but they had seen what humanity could do when survival was at stake. The vote on human membership came 3 days later. The chamber was full but quiet. Representatives spoke their positions calmly. Some praised human effectiveness. Others expressed concern about their methods. All acknowledged that without human help, millions would have died. Stood to speak. Her skin had settled into a deep blue that indicated both respect and caution. The Universal Terror Registry was correct, she said. Human warfare demonstrates intelligent cruelty, but I believe we misunderstood what that intelligence means. Humans do not simply know how to inflict suffering. They understand why suffering works. They understand the psychology of fear and desperation. This makes them dangerous, yes, but it also makes them invaluable. She looked at James. Humans studied war so thoroughly that they found their way to peace. They understand violence so completely that they know how to minimize it. They think about threats in ways we cannot. They see patterns we miss. They make calculations we cannot stomach. This disturbs us, but it also protected us. The vote passed. Humanity would join the Galactic Council, but with a special designation. OK announced the decision personally. Humanity will serve as the Department of Unthinkable Contingencies. You will prepare for threats the rest of us cannot imagine. You will think about horrors we refuse to consider. You will be our last defense against enemies like the consuming fleet. Accepted formally. We understand. You are asking us to remain dangerous so you do not have to be. We accept this burden. After the ceremony, found alone in an observation room, looking out at the stars. Do you hate us? Asked quietly. For asking you to be the monsters we are afraid to become. Was silent for a long moment. No, she finally said. We hate what we were capable of, but we understand necessity. Someone has to think about the darkness. Better us who have been there before than you who might lose yourselves in it. Will you ever forgive yourselves? Asked. Smiled sadly. No, but maybe we can earn the right to move forward. She turned from the window. Update our terror registry file, she said. Under current threat assessment, write this: dangerous, essential, reformed. Monitor closely, but trust completely when the unthinkable arrives, because we have already survived it, and we remember how.